I used to say it like a promise I'd made to myself long before I ever held a newborn. I used to believe there was a correct way to be a parent, like some hidden manual only disciplined people could follow. And if you followed it closely enough, you could raise children who never got lost inside their own fear. I know how arrogant that sounds now. At the time, it felt like hope. It felt like control. It felt like love with a plan. My husband, Evan, would tease me about it in that gentle way he had, like he was smoothing out a wrinkle in fabric instead of contradicting me. When I'd get passionate and start talking about building resilience or teaching critical thinking, he'd raise an eyebrow and say, "You're doing the thing again." And I'd laugh and pretend I was. But I was. I really was. We had 2 children then. Our son, Milo, was 4, bold in the way only little kids can be. The way they can walk right up to a barking dog or a deep puddle like the world owes them answers. Our daughter, Nora, was 6 months old, all soft breath and warm cheeks, and those tiny hands that grab your finger like they're anchoring you to the planet. Together, they made our house feel alive, even when it was quiet. The kind of alive that made you forgive the mess, the noise, the constant stickiness you couldn't explain. If you've ever had a baby asleep on your chest while your older child is building something on the floor, you know the feeling I'm talking about. It's not happiness exactly. It's bigger and sharper. It's like your heart is a room that suddenly has too many windows. We weren't perfect, but we wanted to be deliberate. We wanted to be the kind of parents who didn't just keep our kids safe, but helped them understand why safety mattered. The word why was sacred in our house. We treated it like a doorway. A child asks why, and you either slam the door or you open it and walk through with them. That was the philosophy. I was proud of that philosophy. I had grown up around adults who treated children like annoying furniture. Sit there, be quiet, don't touch, don't ask. I promised myself I wouldn't be like that. I promised my kids wouldn't have to shrink themselves to fit someone else's impatience. I told myself that curiosity was their birthright, and my job was to protect it. And if protecting it meant taking extra time, using extra patience, letting the world become a classroom, then fine. We'd do that. It started in the most harmless ways, in little moments that felt like parenting victories. One afternoon, Milo asked why I was scraping the leftovers into the trash. It was a lasagna Evan had made, one of those heavy, comforting dishes that makes your whole kitchen smell like warmth. We'd eaten it for 2 days, and now it had started to turn, not dramatically, not visibly, but in that subtle way food does when it's about to become a mistake. I could have said, because it's old, and moved on. I could have said, because it'll make you sick, and he would have accepted it. He trusted me. That was the problem. He trusted me so completely that my words could have become his whole understanding of reality, and I didn't want that. I wanted him to learn how to see things for himself. I wanted him to recognize patterns. I wanted him to build his own internal compass instead of borrowing mine forever. So I said, let's not throw it away yet. I found a clear plastic container and put the leftover lasagna inside. I didn't hide it like a secret, but I didn't put it front and center either. I set it in the back of the fridge, where it would sit long enough to become obvious. A few days later, I pulled it out and set it on the counter like an exhibit. Milo climbed onto a chair to look. The lid fogged slightly from the temperature difference, and when I opened it, the smell did the explaining for me. His face twisted in immediate disgust, but his eyes lit up with fascination at the same time. He leaned forward, then recoiled, then leaned forward again, like he was negotiating with his own curiosity. Inside, the lasagna had developed that faint fuzz that looks like it shouldn't exist in a kitchen. Tiny patches of green and white that didn't belong there. You, he said, dragging the word out like it tasted bad. It's growing. What do you think that means? I asked. He stared hard, thinking, his little brows pulling together. It means we shouldn't eat it. And why not? Because it's not the same anymore, he said slowly, like he was assembling a sentence from scratch. Because it changed into gross. I smiled like I'd won something. Exactly. He looked up at me, proud of himself. So that's why you throw things away, he said. Not because you don't like them, because they can turn into gross. It was such a small moment, but it felt like proof. Proof that we were doing it right. Proof that my child was learning to think instead of just obey. If you're not a parent, that might sound ridiculous. If you are, you probably understand exactly why my chest swelled like that. Parenting is 1,000 invisible decisions, and you're always hungry for a sign that you chose correctly. So when Milo asked questions after that, I leaned in even harder, asked why the moon followed the car at night, and I didn't just say, it's far away. I got a flashlight and a ball, and we made a little model on the living room floor. He asked why thunder was loud, and we watched slow-motion videos of lightning and talked about air expanding, about energy turning into sound. He asked why his shadow got longer in the evening, and I dragged him outside and had him step forward and backward in the driveway, laughing as his shadow stretched and shrank like it was alive. Every question became a chance to teach. Every chance to teach became a way to prove we were better than that. Better than the parents who snapped or dismissed or shut down. I didn't notice at first when the questions started changing shape. It happened one night during the bedtime routine. Nora was finally asleep in her crib, and I was standing in the hallway outside Milo's room, enjoying that rare pocket of quiet you get when both kids are down and the house holds its breath. I was already imagining the couch, the comfort of not being touched for 10 whole minutes, when Milo called out, voice high and urgent. Mom, something moved in my closet. Evan was brushing his teeth, foam at the corner of his mouth. He spit and rinsed and gave me a look like, here we go. Milo had a vivid imagination. He always had. Most nights it was simple stuff, the shape of a coat that looked like a person, the sound of pipes that sounded like whispering. Normal kid fears dressed up as monsters. Evan followed our usual approach. He didn't go in with a big dramatic, "Nothing is there." He went in like a scientist. He sat on the edge of Milo's bed and said, "Okay, buddy, what do you think it was?" Milo's eyes were wide in the dim light from his night lamp. "I don't know," he whispered. "I heard like a scratch, like something had fingers." "Well," Evan said softly, "where do you think scratching sounds come from?" Milo hesitated. "Animals." "That's a good guess," I said, stepping closer. "What animals could be in your closet?" Milo swallowed. "A raccoon," he said, "because children think raccoons are everywhere." "Or a monster." Evan smiled, the way he always did, warm, not mocking. "Have you ever seen a monster?" Milo shook his head quickly. "So, where did the monster idea come from?" Milo looked away, embarrassed. "Other kids," he admitted, "at daycare." "And do daycare kids always tell the truth?" Evan asked. That made Milo pause. He actually smiled a little because he knew the answer. "No," he said, like he was confessing to a secret. "They say weird stuff." "Exactly," Evan said. "So we've got one idea that comes from kids telling weird stuff, and one idea that comes from real animals. Which one feels more likely?" "Animal," Milo said, but his voice still trembled. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Do you feel safe enough to check? If I could go back to that exact second, I would do something different. I don't even know what. I just know I wouldn't say that sentence. I wouldn't put the burden of investigation on a 4-year-old's shoulders like it was a fun game. I wouldn't make bravery the requirement for relief." But at the time, it felt empowering. It felt like teaching him he wasn't helpless. It felt like our philosophy in action. Milo nodded, slow and uncertain, and slid out from under his blanket. He padded across the room in socks. His closet door was one of those sliding ones, thin wood painted white, with a little groove at the bottom. He put his hand on the edge, inhaled, and slid it open. Inside, there was nothing supernatural. There was nothing even interesting. His tiny shelf of art supplies sat on the floor, and his clothes hung above it. A cup of crayons had been perched too close to the edge of the shelf, and it had finally tipped over. The crayons were scattered like spilled candy, leaving faint wax streaks on the door. Milo stared at them for a beat, then let out a shaky laugh, half relief and half embarrassment. "It was my crayons," he said, like the answer offended him. Evan chuckled. "Gravity," he said, "a very sneaky monster." Milo laughed harder, shoulders loosening, and I felt that familiar rush of pride again. Another question answered. Another fear turned into understanding. That night, after the kids were asleep, I told Evan, "We did good." He kissed my forehead and said, "We always do." I held onto that sentence like a charm. But the next day, Milo asked me something that didn't fit into our neat little experiments. He was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing with markers, his tongue peeking out in concentration. I was cleaning bottles, rinsing formula off plastic, moving through the motions of motherhood like it was muscle memory. Milo looked up without warning and said, "Mom, why does my arm get bumpy sometimes?" I glanced at him. Little goosebumps rose on his skin. "When does it happen?" I asked. "When I'm cold," he said, "or when I hear a scary sound, or when I see the lady." I paused with a bottle in my hand. "What lady?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Milo shrugged like it wasn't important. "The lady in the park," he said, and went back to drawing. I should have pressed harder then. I should have asked more questions right away. But my brain did what adult brains do. It filed it under kid stuff. It told me it was probably nothing. It told me not to feed his imagination with attention. So I said, "Goosebumps happen when your body is trying to help you." And we looked it up together on my phone. I simplified the explanation, told him about tiny muscles and skin and warmth. He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his markers. But later that week, when we went to the park, he said it again. It was a sunny day, the kind that makes you forget winter exists. Nora was strapped to my chest in a carrier, her head tucked under my chin, her breath warm against my skin. Evan pushed Milo on the swings, laughing as Milo begged for higher. And for a moment life looked exactly like the pictures people put on holiday cards. Then Milo ran back to us, not laughing anymore. He stood close to Evan's leg, fingers twisting his shirt like he needed something to hold onto. "That lady is here," he said quietly. Evan straightened, scanning the park. "What lady?" he asked. "The one who watches me," Milo whispered. I turned slowly, searching faces. The park was full of parents. Some were sitting on benches, some were standing. Some were half watching their phones while their kids played. Normal, ordinary. No one obvious stared back at me like a villain in a movie. "Where is she?" I asked Milo. Milo pointed, but not at a person. He pointed toward the tree line behind the playground, toward the edge where the park met a strip of woods. His finger trembled slightly. I looked there and saw nothing except sunlit leaves and shadows. But Milo's body was tense, his eyes fixed like he could see something I couldn't. "If you don't feel safe," Evan said gently, "we don't have to stay." I wanted to say, "Let's investigate." That was our default. That was our pride. But there was something about Milo's expression that stopped me. He wasn't playful. He wasn't curious. He wasn't even scared in the normal way kids are scared of monsters. He looked wary, like his body had decided something before his brain could explain it. Milo shook his head hard. "I don't want to look," he said. "I just want to go." So we went. On the walk home, Milo kept glancing behind us. Evan tried to lighten the mood, telling Milo he'd done the right thing by speaking up, by trusting his feelings. I added my own reassurance, telling Milo that sometimes not knowing the answer immediately is part of life, that even scientists sometimes have to pause a study because conditions aren't safe or the data isn't clear. I tried to make uncertainty sound like a lesson. But the truth is, I didn't like uncertainty. I never have. That night, after Milo was asleep, I brought it up to Evan in the kitchen. "Do you think there was someone?" I asked. Evan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "It's possible he misread someone's glance," he said. "Or maybe there was a woman who reminded him of someone. Or maybe he's just building a story." "A story," I echoed, but the word didn't sit right in my mouth. Evan took my hand. "Milo's sensitive," he said. "He notices things. That's good. We've taught him to notice." I nodded, forcing myself to accept that as an answer. But later, when I went to check on Milo, I found a new drawing taped to his wall. It was done in thick black marker. A stick figure playground. A stick figure of Milo. A stick figure of Evan and me. And then, off to the side, under a tree, a taller figure drawn differently than the others. Longer arms. No face, just a blank oval shaded in. Above it, Milo had written in his wobbly kid handwriting, "Why are you looking?" I stood there in the dark, staring at that sentence, and I felt something cold move through my chest. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the sensation of realizing that something you thought was imaginary has started leaving footprints. I took the drawing down and put it in a drawer, telling myself I'd talk to Milo about it in the morning. Telling myself I wouldn't overreact. Telling myself I wouldn't turn a child's drawing into a horror story. I didn't want to be the kind of parent who panics at shadows. The problem was, the shadows didn't seem to want me to ignore them. After that, Milo started asking why in a different tone. Not the bright, curious tone he used when he wanted to understand thunder or the moon. This was sharper, urgent, like he needed the answer to breathe. Why did our hallway feel colder at night? Why did Nora's baby monitor make that crackling sound sometimes? Why did the closet door in his room sometimes look like it moved when the air conditioner turned on? Why did the park ladies stand under trees? Evan and I did what we always did. We tried to guide him toward logic. We tried to teach him to separate what he knew from what he imagined. We taught him to look for causes. We made a game of it. We praised him when he found reasonable explanations. We congratulated ourselves for not shutting him down. But I began to notice little things I couldn't explain, even to myself. Once, I was walking past Milo's room late at night, and I heard him whispering. Not talking to a toy. Whispering like someone was whispering back. I paused with my hand on the doorframe, listening. His voice was so quiet I could barely catch the words, but I heard enough to make my skin tighten. "Okay," Milo whispered. "Okay, I'll look." I stepped into his room quickly, heart racing, and found him sitting upright in bed, eyes open, staring toward the closet. His night lamp threw soft light across the room, and the closet door looked normal. Still, closed, silent. "Milo," I said carefully, keeping my voice gentle. "Who are you talking to?" He blinked like he was waking up even though he was already awake. No one, he said too fast. What did you mean? I'll look. He hesitated, then gave me a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just thinking, he said. I sat beside him and brushed his hair back. Thinking about what? Milo's gaze flicked to the closet again. Answers, he said softly, like it was the most normal word in the world. Then he lay back down and pulled his blanket to his chin, and the conversation was over like a door had closed. When I told Evan the next morning, he tried to reassure me. He's probably having half dreams, he said. Kids do that. He's imaginative. It's fine. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be the calm, rational parent who didn't let fear write the story. I wanted to stay in control. But then Nora got sick. It was a simple thing at first. A fever. Bobbies get fevers. Doctors tell you to watch to manage it, to call if it gets worse. Evan was scheduled to be out of town for 2 nights for work. One of those trips that isn't worth it, but still happens, because adulthood is a machine that eats your time. I told him not to cancel. I told him we could handle a fever. I told him we were fine. That evening, Nora was warm against my shoulder, her little body tense in a way that bobbies get when they don't feel right. Her cheeks were flushed. She fussed, then fell asleep, then fussed again. I sat in the rocking chair in her nursery for what felt like hours, watching the baby monitor glow, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Milo hovered in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to enter. His face was serious, his eyes fixed on his sister, like he was trying to solve her. Why is she hot? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Sometimes bobbies get fevers. Her body is fighting something. Milo's mouth tightened. What thing? I'm not sure, I said. The doctor said it should pass. Milo stepped closer, gaze intense. But why does her head hurt? He asked. Why does she cry like that? His voice cracked on the last word. Suddenly, he didn't sound like a scientist. He sounded like a little boy who loved his sister and didn't understand why love couldn't fix everything. I reached out and pulled him close with one arm, rocking Nora with the other. I know it's scary, I said softly, but she's going to be okay. Her body knows what to do. Milo didn't look convinced. He looked angry at the fever, at the unfairness, at the idea that something could hurt someone he loved without permission. He leaned over the crib when I finally laid Nora down, and he gently stroked her hair like he was smoothing out the pain. I want to find it, he whispered. The reason. I want to find the reason and make it stop. And this is where I should have said, sometimes there isn't a reason you can find. I should have said, you can love her without solving her. I should have said, your job is to be her brother, not her doctor. But our whole parenting identity was built on answers, built on investigating, built on the idea that nothing should remain mysterious if you tried hard enough. So I did the dumbest, most dangerous thing I could do in that moment. I rewarded his obsession. I kissed the top of his head and said, "That's a good heart, Milo. You're such a good big brother." His eyes lit up at the praise like they always did, and the look in his face made my stomach twist because it wasn't comfort. It was determination, like I'd given him a mission. I tried to distract myself later with TV in the living room while the baby monitor sat beside me like a second heartbeat. Nora's fever kept spiking and easing. I checked her forehead so many times I felt like my hand was turning into a thermometer. Milo stayed quiet in his room, unusually quiet, like he was saving his energy. At some point, I must have dozed off, the kind of half-sleep you fall into when you're exhausted and your brain is still on alert. I remember the TV flickering, the muffled voices, the weight of the blanket across my legs. I remember thinking briefly that quiet can be a trap. I woke up to silence, not peaceful silence. That particular silence that feels staged, like a room holding its breath. The baby monitor showed Nora's nursery. The camera's night vision made everything look gray and flat. Nora was in her crib, but the angle was wrong, and for a second my sleepy brain couldn't interpret what I was seeing. Then I realized the camera had been nudged. The frame was shifted toward the side of the crib, toward the corner where the dresser stood. My heart sped up. I sat up fast, blanket falling away. And as I stood, I noticed something on the floor that hadn't been there before. Evan's toolbox. It was open like a mouth. The metal tools inside caught the TV light in little glints. A screwdriver lay on the carpet like someone had dropped it without caring where it landed. Evan never left his toolbox open. Evan treated tools like sacred objects. We had rules about them, real rules, the kind we didn't turn into science lessons. Tools were for adults. Tools were for when someone said it was time. Tools were not toys. My first instinct was to blame Evan out of habit, like my brain couldn't accept the more obvious explanation. But Evan wasn't there. And then I remembered Milo's words. I want to find the reason. I didn't walk to the nursery. I ran. The hallway felt longer than it ever had. My feet made no sound on the carpet, and that somehow made it worse, like I was moving through a dream where the house didn't want to be disturbed. Nora's door was cracked open. Light from the night, lamps spilled out in a thin line across the floor. I pushed the door open fully and froze. Milo was inside the crib, not standing beside it, not leaning over it. Inside, his small body was curled awkwardly at the foot of the crib, knees tucked up like he'd climbed into a place he didn't fit. Nora was there too, turned toward him, her face partly hidden against the blanket. Milo's hand rested on her chest, not pressing, not hurting, just checking, the way he'd seen me check her breathing 100 times. In his other hand, he held a screwdriver, not raised like a weapon, but clutched like a tool he wasn't sure how to use. The crib rail had fresh marks in it, tiny gouges in the wood where someone had tried to unscrew something that wasn't meant to be unscrewed. The screws at the corner of the crib frame were scraped shiny, like he'd been working at them. corner of the nursery wall, near the baseboard, had a small gap where the molding had been pried loose. And on the floor, near Milo's knee, was a baby thermometer. He'd assembled a little lab, a little investigation station. He'd brought instruments. He'd brought logic. He'd brought my philosophy into a place it never belonged. "Milo," I said, and my voice came out as a broken whisper. He looked up at me, eyes wide, but not guilty, not scared of me. He looked proud, like a kid who had stayed up late to finish a project for school. "Mom," he said softly, as if loudness might ruin the experiment, "I'm trying to find it." "Find what?" I managed, even though I already knew. "The reason," he said, "the reason she's hot." My whole body felt cold. "Get out of the crib," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Right now, carefully." Milo frowned, confused by my tone. "But I'm being careful," he insisted. "I didn't hurt her. I'm being careful." I stepped forward, hands shaking. "Get out," I repeated. "Now." Milo moved slowly, awkwardly climbing back over the rail. He held the screwdriver out toward me like he expected me to take it the way I'd take a toy he was offering. I snatched it from him and set it on the dresser, far away. Then I leaned into the crib, heart pounding, and checked Nora. She stirred, made a small sound, turned her head. She was warm. She was alive. She was there. Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly buckled. And then, right behind the relief, something else rose up, anger so sharp it burned. Not just anger at Milo, because how could I be angry at a 4-year-old for doing exactly what he'd been trained to do? Anger at myself, at Evan, at the way we'd made curiosity into a religion and forgot to build an altar around it, forgot to teach boundaries, forgot to teach that some questions are not yours to answer. "What were you doing with the wall?" I asked, pointing at the gap in the molding. Milo's eyes flicked toward it. His face went strange then, not proud anymore. He looked like he'd remembered something he wasn't sure he was allowed to say. "I heard her," he whispered. My stomach dropped. "You heard who?" Milo's voice shrank to almost nothing. "The lady," he said. "The park lady." The room seemed to tilt slightly, like the house itself had shifted. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to admit he'd made it up. But his face was serious, pale in the night light. "What did she say?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. Milo swallowed. "She said she knows," he whispered. "She said she knows why." I felt the hair rise on my arms. "Milo," I said slowly, trying to keep panic out of my tone. "Where did you hear her?" He pointed, not to the door, not to the window, to the closet. The nursery closet door was slightly open, just a crack. The way closet doors sometimes end up after you grab a blanket in the dark. A thin line of darkness showed inside. I stared at that crack like it was watching me back. "She said she can help," Milo whispered. "She said if I want the reason, I have to look where the warm comes from." I forced myself to breathe. "What does that mean?" I asked. Milo looked at me with the sincerity only children have. She said bobbies get hot because the warm is trapped, he said, as if repeating a lesson from a teacher. She said if I open it, the warm can go away. And then Nora won't be hot anymore. I felt sick because even as fear screamed in my chest, part of my brain understood how Milo's logic had worked. He hadn't heard kidnap your sister. He hadn't heard hurt her. He'd heard a puzzle, a cause and effect problem, something you could solve if you were brave and clever enough, something a good big brother could fix. And we had taught him over and over that fear was just a question waiting to be answered. I scooped Nora up, holding her close, and backed away from the crib. Milo, I said, you never, ever use tools without an adult. Do you understand me? Milo's eyes filled with tears. But you said to find out, he whispered. You always say find out. That sentence hit me like a slap. I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain the difference between investigating spilled crayons and investigating a baby's fever. I wanted to say, not like this. I wanted to say, not that. I wanted to say, there are limits. But children don't understand limits you never taught them. They understand patterns. And the pattern we'd built was clear. Questions deserve answers, and bravery is the way you get them. I shut the nursery door behind us and carried Nora into my bedroom, locking the door like a paranoid person in my own house. I sat on the bed with Nora on my chest, feeling her little breath, staring at the wall, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Milo cried softly outside the door, calling my name, confused and frightened and hurt. I didn't let him in right away because I didn't know what was real anymore. I didn't know whether the danger was in his hands, in the house, or in my own choices. Eventually, I opened the door and pulled him into my arms, and he clung to me like he was the baby, shaking. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I'm sorry. I just wanted to fix it. I know, I whispered into his hair, and I meant it. That was the worst part. I knew. The next day, I called Evan and told him to come home early. I took Nora to the doctor again. The fever was already easing, like it had never been anything more than a minor virus. The doctor reassured me in that calm, routine way doctors have, like they've seen every version of parental fear, and none of it surprises them anymore. But I couldn't shake what Milo had said. The lady, the closet, the warm trapped. That night, Evan came home, and we sat at the kitchen table after the kids were asleep, the toolbox now locked away in the garage. I told him everything in one rush, because if I didn't say it fast, it might sound insane, even to me. Evan listened with his jaw tight, hands clasped like he was holding himself together. When I finished, he stared at the table for a long time. Finally, he said, "He's 4. I know, I said. That's what scares me. Evan rubbed his face. He could be imagining it, he said. He could be mixing things up. He could have had a dream. Then why did he point to the closet? I asked. Why did he know where the tools were? Why did he do all that? Evan looked up, eyes tired. Because he's smart, he said. Because we taught him to be. Because he wanted to help. His words were meant to comfort me. They didn't. After that night, the house changed for me. Not physically. The walls were the same. The hallway was the same. The closets were the same. But my trust in it was gone. I started noticing every creak, every shift of air, every moment when a door seemed to move slightly on its own. I started checking the baby monitor obsessively. I started sleeping in shallow, broken pieces. And Milo started changing too. He stopped asking fun questions for a while. He became quieter, more inward. When he did ask why, it wasn't curious anymore. It was anxious, like he was trying to make the world predictable again. Sometimes he would stand in front of a closet door and just stare, as if listening. When I'd ask what he was doing, he'd shrug and say, "Nothing," too quickly. Once, I found him drawing that faceless woman again. Only this time she was inside our house, her long arms stretching down the hallway. Milo had written another sentence in shaky letters under her feet. She KNOWS. Evan wanted to throw the drawings away. I wanted to keep them like evidence, like proof I wasn't overreacting. In the end, I did both. I threw some away. I hid some. I felt like a person in a story I didn't want to be in. We tried to correct course as parents. We started being firmer about boundaries. We still explained things, but we didn't invite Milo to investigate everything. We told him some areas were adult only. We told him some questions didn't have immediate answers. We tried to teach him that I don't know can be safe, but it was like trying to patch a roof after the rain has already soaked the house. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in Milo's room when I noticed something on his closet door. A faint wax mark like a line, then another, and another, like someone had drawn on the door with crayons. I opened the closet and looked inside. His crayons were in their cup on the shelf. They hadn't spilled, but the wax lines were there anyway, thin, pale streaks like someone had dragged color across the door and then erased it. I stood there with my pulse thudding, staring at the inside of that closet like it might blink. I should have told Evan right away. I should have called someone. I should have done anything. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I looked for a reasonable explanation. Maybe Milo had drawn earlier and I hadn't noticed. Maybe the marks had always been there. Maybe the light angle made them look new. Maybe the mind plays tricks when it's tired and scared. I closed the closet door and went on folding laundry, but my hands shook. Every few minutes, I caught myself glancing at the door again, waiting for movement. That evening, Milo asked me if he could sleep with the closet light on. Why, I asked automatically, then hated myself. Milo's eyes flicked toward the closet. Because if it's dark, he whispered, she talks more. My throat went tight. Who talks more? Milo's lower lip trembled. "The lady," he said. "She says I'm good at finding reasons." I forced a smile that felt like plastic. "Sweetie, sometimes when you're scared, your brain makes up voices," I said gently. "It doesn't mean they're real." Milo shook his head hard. "It's not my brain," he insisted, almost angry. "It's the closet." That night, Evan sat with Milo and tried a different approach. He asked Milo to describe her voice, to describe what she said. Milo answered like he was trying to be helpful, like he wanted his parents to understand the way we always wanted him to understand. He said she didn't have a face. He said her voice sounded like someone talking through a blanket. He said she asked him questions back, the way we did. "Why do you think that happened, Milo? Why do you think your sister got sick? Why do you think you feel cold?" Evan and I exchanged a look when Milo repeated those phrases. It felt like hearing our own voices come back wrong, like a lullaby turned into something else. We tried to shut it down. We told Milo firmly that he was not to talk to the lady, that he was to call us if he heard anything, that he was not to open doors or climb into cribs or use tools. We told him we believed he was scared and we would keep him safe. But safety isn't just rules. Safety is trust, and trust is fragile. A week later, Evan found the nursery closet open in the middle of the night. The door had been shut when we went to bed. It was open when he went to check the baby monitor. He closed it. He checked the latch. It was fine. The next night, it was open again. The next morning, Evan installed a simple child lock. Nothing dramatic, just a small plastic latch that would keep little hands out. He did it without a word, like he didn't want to make it real by saying it out loud. That afternoon, I found the latch undone. I stared at it for a long time, my mind cycling through possibilities that all felt wrong. Milo couldn't have undone it. His hands weren't strong enough. I tried it myself and felt resistance. It took adult force. I waited until Evan got home and said, "Did you open the nursery closet today?" He frowned. "No," he said. "Why?" I showed him the latch. Evan's face drained of color just slightly. A tiny change. But I noticed, because I was watching him for signs, that I wasn't alone in my fear. That night, Evan slept with the baby monitor volume turned up high. He slept like a man on duty, not like a husband in his own bed. Nothing happened. And in the morning, that almost felt worse, because it meant the house could behave whenever it wanted. It meant the fear wasn't predictable. It meant the answers weren't coming. Then, on a quiet afternoon, Milo disappeared for 3 minutes. 3 minutes doesn't sound like much. Parents know it can be a lifetime. I was in the kitchen washing dishes, Nora and her bouncer beside me, babbling at the ceiling fan like it was her best friend. Milo had been in the living room building with blocks. I could hear the soft clack of plastic, his little voice humming to himself. Everything was ordinary. That's what still makes me sick when I think about it. The ordinariness. Then the block sound stopped. At first, I didn't panic. Kids get quiet. Quiet is sometimes a blessing. I kept washing dishes, telling myself I deserved 5 seconds of peace. Then I realized the quiet wasn't normal. It was that staged silence again, that breath-holding silence. I turned off the faucet, hands dripping, and called, "Milo." No answer. I called again, louder, "Milo." Still nothing. My heart began to race. I dried my hands on my shirt, leaving wet streaks, and walked quickly into the living room. The blocks were there, scattered on the rug. Milo was not. I checked the bathroom, empty. I checked his room, empty. I checked the hallway closet, closed. I felt the panic surge then, sharp and immediate, like a siren in my blood. I called his name again, voice cracking, and finally I heard a small sound from the nursery. A whisper. I ran to the nursery and pushed the door open. Milo was standing in front of the closet, his face tilted upward as if someone taller was speaking to him. He didn't flinch when I entered. He didn't look guilty. He looked focused. "Milo," I snapped, and the edge in my voice startled even me. "What are you doing?" He turned slowly. His eyes looked too calm. "Listening," he said. "Listening to what?" He glanced back at the closet door. "She said there's a place where warm goes," he whispered. "She said there's a place where answers hide." A cold wave moved through me. I stepped forward and grabbed his shoulders gently, but firmly, turning him away from the closet. "No," I said. "No more. Do you hear me? No more listening." Milo's face crumpled. "But you always want me to know," he whispered, tears forming. "You always want me to know why." I held him tight, shaking. "Not like this," I said, and my voice broke on the words. That night, Evan and I argued in whispers in our bedroom while the kids slept. Evan wanted to call a child psychologist. I wanted to move. Evan said moving wouldn't change Milo's mind. I said maybe it would change whatever was in the house. Evan said I was letting fear write a supernatural story. I said maybe fear was the most honest thing I'd felt in weeks. And then Evan said something that cut deeper than anything else. He said, "What if it's not the house, it's us?" I didn't answer, because I didn't have an answer that didn't hurt. We did call a psychologist. We did schedule an appointment. We did start using different language with Milo. We stopped praising investigation the way we used to. We praised patience. We praised asking for help. We praised stopping when something felt wrong. But the damage was already threaded through Milo's thinking. You can teach a child that answers are power, and then you can't be surprised when he goes looking for power in the dark. The final night happened in a way that still feels unreal to me, like my memory has been edited by guilt. Nora's fever came back, mild this time, but enough to put me on edge. Evan was home. I should have felt safer. I didn't. We kept Nora in the nursery, the room dim and cool, the fan on low. Evan stayed with Milo in his room for bedtime, trying to keep things normal, reading stories, doing deep breathing the way the psychologist had suggested for anxiety. I sat in the nursery rocking Nora, watching her eyelashes flutter. Milo wandered in after a while, silent in the doorway again. "How is she?" he whispered. "Okay," I said softly. "She's okay." Milo stepped closer, eyes fixed on Nora's face. "Does she still have warm trapped?" he asked. My stomach tightened. "Milo," I said carefully, "sometimes bodies get warm to fight germs. It's not trapped. It's working." Milo stared like he was trying to accept that answer, but I could see the doubt in him. He glanced toward the closet. His eyes flicked there like a habit. I stood up with Nora in my arms. "Why don't you go back to bed?" I said, forcing a calm tone. "Dad's waiting." Milo nodded, but he didn't move right away. He looked up at me and said something that chilled me in a way no fever ever could. "She said, if I can't find the reason," he whispered, "she can take the questions away." I froze. "Who said that?" Milo's eyes filled with tears. "The lady," he whispered. "She said she can make it quiet." I felt a rush of anger then, anger at the idea of something speaking to my child. Anger at myself for letting our home become a place where he felt he needed to negotiate with darkness. "No," I said firmly. "No one is taking anything. No one is making anything quiet. You come to me. You hear me. You come to me." Milo nodded quickly, wiping his face. "Okay," he whispered. Evan appeared in the doorway then, concern on his face. "Everything okay?" he asked. I forced a smile. "He's just worried," I said. Evan knelt and hugged Milo. "She's okay," he said, kissing Milo's hair. "You're safe. Everyone's safe." Milo clung to him for a moment, then slipped away and padded down the hall to his room. Evan and I exchanged a look. The kind of look parents exchange when they're both thinking the same thought and neither wants to say it out loud. That night, Evan insisted on locking the toolbox in the garage again. He checked every closet door. He checked windows. He turned the hallway light on and left it on. He tried to build safety out of rituals. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the house. Around midnight, I heard a soft sound from the hallway. A quiet click, like plastic shifting. My heart started racing immediately because fear teaches you your own language. I nudged Evan awake. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He sat up, listening. The house was silent again. "Probably the heat," he murmured, trying to convince both of us. Then the baby monitor crackled. Evan and I both stared at it. The screen showed the nursery in gray night vision. Nora was in her crib. The closet door was closed. Everything looked normal. Then slowly, the closet door began to open. Not fast, not like a gust of air pushed it. Slow, smooth, intentional. Evan was out of bed before I could breathe. He rushed down the hallway, and I followed, heart slamming, the world narrowing to that crack in the door. When we reached the nursery, The closet door was open a few inches. Evan flung it open fully, searching inside like he expected to find a person. There was nothing, just hanging baby clothes, stacked blankets, a box of diapers. And then we heard it, a whispering sound from down the hall, from Milo's room. We ran. Milo's door was open. His closet light was on. Milo was standing in front of it, his small body rigid, his face tilted upward again, like he was listening to someone taller. Evan snapped, "Milo," and strode forward, grabbing him gently, pulling him back. Milo didn't fight. He didn't cry. He looked dazed, like someone waking up from a dream. Evan crouched, holding Milo's shoulders. "What are you doing?" Evan demanded, voice tight. "What's going on?" Milo blinked slowly. "She said I can be good," he whispered. "Who is she?" I asked, though my voice shook. Milo looked past us, toward the hallway, and whispered, "She said if I give her the questions, she'll give me quiet." Evan's face went white. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something I never wanted to see in my husband: helplessness. Because what do you do when your child believes he's negotiating with something you can't see? Evan scooped Milo up and carried him into our bedroom. He put Milo between us in bed, like a physical barrier against the dark. We didn't sleep. We took turns watching the hallway. We listened to the house creak and sigh like it was alive. Nothing happened after that. And you might think that's the end, that the morning came, and we laughed it off as sleepwalking or nightmares or anxiety. You might think we got help and healed and moved on. But real horror doesn't always end with a scream. Sometimes it ends with paperwork. The next day, Milo told the psychologist about the lady. He told her about the answers. He told her about the tools, about trying to open where warm goes. He told her with the same honest seriousness he'd always used when explaining something he'd learned. He wasn't trying to be dramatic. He wasn't trying to scare anyone. He was simply describing his reality. The psychologist listened, took notes, asked careful questions. Evan and I sat stiffly, trying not to look like the kind of parents who lose control of their home. Then the psychologist asked about the night Milo climbed into Nora's crib with a screwdriver. I answered honestly, because that's who I was. Because honesty was another thing I thought made me a good parent. The psychologist's expression changed slightly. Not fear, not judgment, just process, like gears turning in her head. She said there were protocols. She said there were mandatory reports. She said words like safety risk and supervision and environmental factors. We left her office with Milo holding my hand and Nora asleep in her carrier. And I still didn't fully understand what was about to happen to our lives. 2 days later, a social worker came to our house. She was kind. That was the most brutal part. If she had been cruel, I could have hated her and stayed whole. But she was kind, professional, calm. She walked through our home and asked gentle questions. She looked at the nursery closet. She looked at Milo's room. She asked where we kept tools. She asked what we did when Milo said he heard voices. She asked what safety measures we'd taken. Evan and I answered everything. We showed locks. We showed gates. We showed the toolbox in the garage. We showed how careful we were now. But now is a thin word when you're standing in front of consequences. The social worker explained that, for the time being, they needed to ensure Nora's safety. She explained that Milo needed assessment and support, and that while we were working through that, they couldn't allow a situation where an impulsive act could hurt a baby, even accidentally. She talked about temporary arrangements, about family placements, about reunification plans. Her words sounded like a foreign language. I kept waiting for someone to say, "This is ridiculous. You're good parents. You made a mistake and learned." No one said that, because systems don't care what you meant. They care what could have happened. Nora went to live with Evan's sister first. Milo went with her too, because they didn't want to separate siblings. That sentence still feels like a punch when I write it. My children went to live somewhere else. My children left my house holding someone else's hand, and the house, without them, became a museum of my own failure. The toys stayed where they'd been dropped. The high chair sat in the corner like it was waiting for a ghost to eat. Milo's drawings remained taped to the walls because I couldn't bring myself to pull them down. The faceless lady under the tree, the stretched arms in the hallway, the sentence in shaky letters, she KNOWS. Evan tried to be strong. He talked about plans, about steps, about getting our kids back, about therapy and parenting classes and safety inspections, about proving ourselves in a way we'd never imagined needing to. I nodded, I agreed, I showed up. I did everything asked of me. But late at night, when the house was empty, I walked past Milo's room and heard a faint sound from inside. A whisper, not a voice I could make out. Not words, just the suggestion of speech, like someone murmuring behind a door. I told myself it was pipes. I told myself it was the heater. I told myself grief creates hallucinations. And then I remembered the way the closet door had opened on the monitor. Slow, smooth, intentional. Some nights I stood in the hallway and stared at the closet door, waiting for it to move. Waiting for proof I could hold up like a shield and say, "See, it wasn't us. It wasn't just us." It never moved for me. It never gave me anything clean and explainable. It never gave me an answer I could use. Because maybe that's the cruelest kind of horror. When the thing you're afraid of refuses to become visible enough to fight. Weeks passed, then months. I saw my children on scheduled visits. Milo clung to me like he was afraid I'd vanish. Nora looked at me with that baby expression that isn't judgment or forgiveness, just recognition. Evan's sister was generous, patient, exhausted. She said Milo had nightmares sometimes. She said he asked about the lady less now, But sometimes he'd stare at a closet door like he was listening. The psychologist said Milo's anxiety might have created a figure in his mind. The social worker said we were making progress. The paperwork said pending, and my heart said something else entirely. My heart said that I had built a home where questions were sacred, and something in the dark had learned how to speak that language better than I could. My heart said I had trained my child to believe that fear is just a mystery waiting to be solved. And then I acted surprised when he tried to solve it with whatever tools he could find. My heart said that love isn't always enough to keep a child safe, especially when love is tangled up with pride. I used to say it like a pledge. I used to believe being a good parent was about answers. Now I know it's also about limits, about humility, about admitting that some doors should stay closed, not because your child isn't smart enough, but because the world isn't always safe enough to explain itself. I had two, and now, when people ask me how many kids I have, my mouth still wants to give the old answer, like reflex, like muscle memory. But the truth is, right now, I have none. Not in my house, not in my arms, not in the quiet space where their laughter used to live. And in the middle of the night, when the hallway is dark and the closets stand like mouths with their teeth hidden, I sometimes hear it again, the soft suggestion of whispering that sounds like a question being asked. Why do you think this happened?